All right, so this is an MVP for a client, most viable product. I just built on top of Next.js 13 and TypeScript. We decided not to use the app router because of its experimental nature, but we did have an excellent backend. All this data is coming from, which is Strapi. So this is my Strapi admin backend. We chose this after experimenting with a lot of other CMSs like WordPress, Sanity.io, Graph CMS, etc. And finally, we decided on this one because of its excellent features. For example, the content types it presents. Like here, for single page, we have single type, and this is where the homepage data coming from. This stuff, the testimonials and headings. Also, we have reusable components like author here. We can use over and over. We're using on the homepage and the testimonial collection, and then this feature testimonial, another component, and all these are building this homepage. And then the main part of the show is this job board. This is where two main collections are involved, which is jobs and companies. And here they are. And best part of this is the relational data. Strapi makes it really, really simple to connect collections with this kind of relationship, one to many, many to many, etc., etc. They make it really, really easy. And then comes this content manager. This is where client would insert all the data. This is how they handle their images. They have this excellent media library also. Plus, they have nice little authentication and role management involved here. Here we can protect the data with API tokens. And then using these roles, we can give the client access so that they can manage the data without disturbing anything else. They also have excellent documentation on everything. And above all, after everything is said and done, we get a nice little REST API out of it with all the necessary data I need. So now let's get back to the main features. Okay, so this is the main job board, and this is where all the filters are. So let's say if I want to pick out just the remote onlys, when the remote shows up, and add features to it. So we can actually isolate the data we need. Also, then let's say just look at full-time ones and the contracts. And let's decide to find jobs within 50K and 100K range. And we have them. And then add the above 100K ones also. That. And then we can sort them according to company name, alphabetical order. And then let's say date posted, ascending, descending. Also salary range, low to high, and then high to low. On top of all, we have full text search, which Strapi enables us to do. So let's say type in face. So we can easily see that two Facebooks show up, but why is this showing up, right? So let's click on the detail, go to the single job page, and do a search on face, and right there in the text, it's right, embedded here. So that means we are searching through pretty much everything. And from here, since we are added to the company, we can just click here and go straight to the company and look at company's other jobs. And as you can see, everything is loading so fast because I've implemented the SSG static page generation and included ISR with it, which is incremental static regeneration. What happens is when any of these contents are changed, then Next.js itself takes over and goes out there, makes a call to the backend, and accordingly regenerates the new content, new page. And last but not least, we have pagination enabled. And for now, that's about all the features we have. But the main reason for making this video is how the app was architected in the backend. I have two different patterns sitting on top of Next.js, the backend pattern and front-end pattern, and that's what we're going to talk about next. And yes, before we talk about the architecture, I just wanted to show that how responsive this is. And all the styling and responsiveness were handled using the Tailwind library and some Sass. So as you can see here, I'm going to go ahead and nicely bring down for pretty much any mobile media. And here comes the filter, mobile menu, and the main page mobile menu. And now let's go look at the architecture. So this is the backend pattern that I was talking about. So this is how I set up my data collection from the Strapi backend. As you can see here, from the Strapi backend, I created a API client where I'm giving it the generic API URL, and this is where the token and stuff is attached. For example, let's go here and let me show the services, Strapi API client, and this is what it looks like. And then I have an HTTP service layer, and this is where I'm actually creating some generic functions like getAll, getOneBySlug, etc., and declaring a generic type, what you can see here. Since this is in TypeScript, it just everything needs a structure, and this is what I gave it because I found this is the base structure of pretty much any data collection that Strapi gives us. So generalized it here, creating a HTTP class here with the necessary methods, getAll, getOneBySlug, and it's also accepting a query from outside, which we will get to soon. Then comes the data service layers, and this is where I give it the specific collection data structure and the API URL it needs to look into, like here. For example, let's go to company service, and this is what it's going to look like. And I'm bringing in the data type from its data layer, which we will look at very soon. And this is where I'm telling it where to go. Same with the job service. Now comes the data layer. This is where I'm creating one service for each collection, and that's where it's going to have all its functions, getAll, getBySlug, etc. And they're going to look like this. A data layer, it's a company, and this is where the company, all the functions are, and they're communicating with the necessary service, and based on the service they're calling the HTTP function like getAll and sending the query. I'm building the query right here, and each one of them has an entity file where I declare all the interfaces, the data structure of each block. Same with the job here, and this is the jobs data layer file. Then we consolidate everything in one single data source in the index file, which is right here. Here we are calling all the necessary stuff from the data layer and building a generic interface and feeding it to the base data source. And this single point of source is going to be called from pretty much every client-side pages or services. For example, let me just show you. As we know, it has an API part, Next.js. Under this API, this is where, I use those for testing. This is where I was calling straight the data source, get companies, company by slug, etc., etc. This is strictly for data testing. But for job search, though, I was actually using this. Now, if we look into the page here via static prop, this is where I'm making the call and passing the data along the homepage content and bringing in the homepage content component and displaying the data. But in the jobs case, I have two of them. The index that gives me the main job list and the single pages the created by Slug. And from here, we will switch to the front end pattern, which is, so from the backend data source, the job index page will bring in all the job data and pass it along to the content page, job content page, and job content page has a implemented context API, and is going to provide this job data as one of its attributes. And in the context API, I'm going to be declaring all the necessary states, and these states are going to be distributed via the context API to all the separate modules like the job search form, sidebar, job sort form, job list form for the display. And then any changes client make here, they're going to be a request made to the data source by the context API, and the data source then use the filters, collect the new data set, and deliver it to the context API, and accordingly the context API will distribute the data, update the data for all the necessary components. Let's look at an example. So right here, using the getStaticProp, I'm collecting the data source here and collecting all the jobs data and pass it along to the jobs page right here. And then I'm calling the jobs page content, which is here. This job content page, I'm actually dividing it into two parts. One is the job board, and this is the part where the actual JSX and all the subcomponents lie, which actually makes the whole page. For example, the job list, that's this component is actually holding all these job lists and pagination, and then there will be sidebar and the search form and the sort form. They're all in here, right there. Jobs, sort form, the search form, etc. So I am wrapping all of them up here with job provider, and this job provider is actually coming from the context API, and this context API I'm actually feeding it with the original data source, the jobs, which is coming from here that I collected using this getStaticProps. And now let's look at the job context page. This is initially, these are just the TypeScript types, interfaces, etc. And this is the job provider, which is besides the children, it's also accepting that in the initial jobs. And this is where also I am declaring all the states that are like displayed jobs. This one is taking the original jobs as the initial state, and then current page for pagination, sidebar form state, then search form state. And eventually creating this job context provider to feed all the children with all these states. Like this is where this is happening. Like all these states are going to the necessary job components that you saw in the JSX file. And according to these state changes, I have set up two triggers. The one is dependent on the sidebar state. If the sidebar, any of the state changes, then it will call this find jobs, or if the other one is the search form state, it depends on anything any changes on the search, it would also invoke this find jobs. and say, it will send the combination of all the states to this URI job search via this function find jobs, and this one eventually make a call to the original data source as explained here. Any changes made here will also make via the context API. Via those triggers, it will make a call to the data source and send the new states, and depending on the new states, it will return the new filtered job data. And this job data will update display jobs or this jobs state in the context, thus making the changes show up in the job list right here. And that's what's happening all throughout this whole architecture, making this app possible. Like, for example, if I hit this, it is now making the call to the data source, and via the context API, just updated the results showing here. And that's about all I have on this specific application. As I said before, this is still an MVP, most viable product, and a lot more to come. And hopefully this explains the architecture of this application. Thanks for watching.